Hey everybody, welcome. Today we are talking about the timeline of human consciousness. The timeline of human consciousness. Now, what this is a combination of the biblical narrative, of what we learn out of the biblical teachings, and most importantly, as well as we translate this into life, maturity, age, growing, and understanding of the world. So, this teaching is going to be very critical for you to understand not just human consciousness in terms of what science has taught us and maturity and the development of conscience and consciousness, but it gives us an overview of how your brain works and the development of your mind into adulthood as well as beyond that. Hope this is a blessing to you. Now, the very first place for us to start is in the place called zero, or where we call pre-formation. This exists in a place before your mom and dad have met, before anything has happened. God already had called you. He had known you. This is what he says to Jeremiah. Before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. So before there was even a plan, before there was DNA, before there was all elements put together, God had already foreknowledge of you. And what we have and understand from that is that's what we call creation. At this point or moment of your life, you have purpose, you have identity, you have calling, and most importantly, you have knowledge, divine knowledge. This is in a point in which God has called you. And remember, when we are talking about calling, it's a call and response. So you are aware, you are preloaded with all the benefits, all the power, all the grace, all the knowledge that God has ordained or given to you. So we call this thing pre-formation. I once posed a question a couple of months ago and I asked people, who were you before you wore this skin? Who were you before you had this color, before you were this person, before the environment and the culture taught you what you were? And so when God is speaking even to Jeremiah, he's speaking to somebody and he's reminding him of a calling that he placed upon him, because you were called even before you were in your mother's womb. So it's a call, it's an ordinance, it is a specific calling that has been placed upon your life. You were created before you were born, all right? So that's what we call pre-formation. Number 2, conception. Conception is that moment where, as you know, the biology, sperm, ovaries, eggs, and everything comes together, and that moment, birth begins to happen. So people always ask, when does life begin? Life begins at conception. By very definition of life, which is biological life, begins at conception. And so at that moment, that answers a lot of questions. I know a lot of people have been talking about this, and all these people that have views concerning life and the termination of life and so forth and so forth. Life begins at conception. I think that settles that. Number 3, then we have what we call pregnancy. This is the development of the pregnancy. And this is the moment in which imprinting begins. This is a moment in which thoughts, ideas, sight, and all these senses begin to form. And what we are talking about is understanding. And we know even through scripture that there is a response, or rather a understanding or cognition, the development of such things in the womb. In the Bible, the story of Jesus meeting his cousin, John. And the Bible says that at the moment where they met, there was an interruption. There was an interaction. It's like they met and immediately they moved within the womb. So that is a moment there in which we call pregnancy. I remember when we went a couple of years ago to do the prenatal classes, we were told that if you argue, if you speak, if you talk, your child begins to hear. They pick up on stress from the mother. They pick up on stress in the environment. They pick up tone in the way people speak to each other. And so even children hear and understand in the womb. That's a very critical part of interactions. Now, between 0 and 18 months, we have a period in which we call it innocence. This is the time where there is no self-awareness. There is complete and utter innocence. The most critical thing about this period of time is there's no development of conscience as yet. And instead, I actually read a report once that says that between the ages, under the ages of 18 months, that's a year and a half, right? Children actually believe genuinely that they are one and the same thing with their mother. They believe that they are connected to their mom. And essentially, at that point in time, they cannot survive outside of the support and interaction of another human being, right? At that point in time, they can't eat for themselves. They can't do much. And for a long time, they are genuinely convinced that them and their mother are one thing. So during this period of time, we have what we call innocence, and complete and absolute innocence. And after this 18-month period, something interesting happens, the development of something we call conscience. Now, conscience takes you into that 18 months period and into your 8-year period where, number one, they become self-aware. There's a development of self-awareness. There's the birth of what we call conscience, as I've spoken, and we have what we call world consciousness. They become aware of the world, the size of the world. The world is so much bigger than my environment, than my family, than my people, than the people that are around me. And there's a growth of understanding of consciousness. There's now an understanding of community and the meanings of community, of social structures and social dynamics and social norms. My daughter is 7 years old, and she's starting to really understand color dynamics. And this has come up several times, very, very interesting conversation and perspective from her, because she understands color in a very different way. I'm talking about race, right? So she's beginning to pick up differences in race. The other time she was asking us, why is it that daddy has a lot of white friends? Right, mommy doesn't have a lot of white friends, but daddy has a lot of white friends, because most of the time I'm interacting with people of Caucasians. And for her, that awareness, that consciousness is beginning to come out with questions concerning understanding of moral value, community, meanings, race, and her place in the world. So there's the establishment of moral values and understanding of self and understanding of others. There's a profound understanding of right and wrong. In this time, with the Jews, they spent the first 12 years of a child's life teaching them morality, teaching them the Torah, teaching them to understand that. And this still happens even in Muslim communities, where if you miss this time window to establish an understanding of morality and values, it's hard to teach those later on. And so the first 12 years, we're very critical for that. But the first 8 years are much, much more important for the establishment of that. Right and wrong. There's a moment of curiosity and observation. They are learning from the environment. They are learning to adapt to the environment. In this period of time, most people lose God consciousness and become world conscious, because you now understand, okay, this is how the environment works, this is how the world works, and this is how I fit into that world as well. And most importantly, environmental influence as well. This is between the ages of 18 months to the age of 8 years. From the age of 8 to 12, which is technically a bracket, we have now what we call sexual awareness. Sexual awareness. It is a very, very tragic part of this conversation, because I was listening to a lot of interviews and discussions on people discovering when did you become sexually aware for the first time. And a surprising amount of women mentioned the age of 8. And it terrifies me as a father, because now I'm worried that this is a reality that my children will have to deal with anyway. And in many instances, I remember we've had to do prayers with people, and people are worried about their kids. And I'm like, no, this is just the development of sexual awareness, right? So they become aware of the fact that I'm male. What does that mean? I'm female. What does that mean? What is this feeling? What are the kind of feelings that they are having? This is the moment of autonomy and thought. This is the moment of cemented values and beliefs between the age of 8 and 12. This is the time we need to protect children the most from certain things, from television, from all of that stuff. We've made it a rule in our marriage, in our home, to protect our children from television, to protect them from being taught certain things, and to make sure that around this period of time, they must be taught about autonomy, about body autonomy, about safety, about all of those things, to have deep, meaningful conversations about that in order to protect them. Now, the world we live in is a scary, dangerous place, and it's very important then that we have a proper way to teach and establish these things and put them in place. This is the beginning of the end of innocence. This is the beginning of the end of innocence. This is the place where a poor sense of consequence is developed. Because remember, they have no understanding of consequence. They don't know what the implications of a certain decision or the outcome should be. And for that reason, this period of time is a time when even parents must become more acutely aware to protect, to cover, to shield children. All right? This is very important. Not just females, because unfortunately in our culture, we view this only from the perspective of females, but from men as well. So this is a very critical aspect in the development of these discussions. And most importantly, this is in this period of time, even in according to our courts, according to our systems, we have what we call lack of criminal capacity. So these people are children. They are children in any sense of the word. So even if they do something completely messed up, right, that we're talking about a crime. If they and I remember a few weeks ago there was a discussion on a 12-year-old who did something really messed up, murdered people and so forth and so forth. Even at such an instance, it is labeled to be lack of criminal capacity because they are children. At this point in time, the innocence is dying, but it can be ascertained based on observation in South Africa. I read this correctly. They say that the courts and that the police are the ones who must determine whether this person had criminal intention or not. But it is believed at this moment in time that a child is incapable of making any consequential decision. So even if they do a crime, it's a child that has committed it, and by such doing, then it is considered as not a criminal to be done without criminal intention. That is between the ages of 8 to 12. Between the ages of 12 to 21, right, 12 to 21, in this moment is only when a child can be dedicated to God through baptism. That's only when they can make a true decision to follow God. Okay, so there's a reaffirmation. Especially for some of us, I grew up in the church. I gave my life to Christ at the age of 7, but I did not have deep, real understanding of what that meant until around the age of 12. Okay, so then a true decision should be made. A child should not be. The only thing we can do before the age of 12 is to dedicate a child to God, but you cannot say a child is baptized before the age of 12. Why is that important? Because at that moment, they can make a decision to become a Christian or not. They can make a decision to be baptized or not. They have somewhat an understanding of critical decisions to say, is this something I want in my life or not? Granted, they still no profound understanding of consequence, but there's at least enough understanding to say, this is the path I want to go in my life or not. So one of the most important things is, even in the church, we advise most people never to baptize somebody who is under the age of 12. It is not appropriate to do that because most of the time they have not yet made a decision or do not have the capacity to decide that. And so the age of 12 is usually a safe age in which someone is capable of making a decision such as baptism. All right, so this is the era of baptism and decision making, number one. Number two, this is the place in which salvation is possible, or conscious awareness of salvation is possible. All right, number three, this is the place in which where then innocence is absolutely, completely gone. It is the end of innocence between the age of 12 to 21, right? So the teenagers, 19, 20, 21. At that moment in time, someone is transitioning into adulthood. And at that point in time, innocence is completely gone and lost. Now, innocence and purity are two completely different things. I had a discussion on this a long time ago, that innocence can be lost, but purity can be regained. In your 40s, in your 50s, you can regain purity, but it is not innocence. All right, now when we'll discuss that a little bit later. Once innocence is gone, it's completely and utterly gone. I cannot be innocent again. It's not possible. But if I was impure for any reason, it is possible to be pure again. In fact, the very premise of Christianity is that purity can be regained for anybody. All right, but innocence, once gone, is gone. Once you've been exposed to a certain world and the realities of that world, you cannot then become absolved from the innocence of that information or that space. All right. So in this moment between the ages of 12 to 21, sin and iniquity take root. Sin and iniquity take root. So I become like my mom. I become like my dad. I become like my forefathers. I become human. I become like my generation. Every single time I'm praying with my kids, I pray that the sins of this generation will not touch them. I pray for them, and I'm praying to redeem them, even as they are young, right? Mine is 7, 5, and 3. And even as I pray for them, I pray that God save my kids from the sins of this generation. And that's one of the biggest things that I do as a parent, even in preparation for their adulthood, that I preserve them and I protect, I build a fence around the information that they get exposed to, so that by the time they are older, they've already got a buffer. They are already fed. They are protected from all of those things. By the time the world starts trying to teach them and equip them, I've already fed them with the word of God. And that's why the Bible says, bring up a child in the way they should grow up. And even as they get older, they will not depart from it, in the way of the Lord. If you teach them about God much earlier in their life, you protect them from the world later on in their lives. And that's important. So in this moment between 12 and 21, consequence and sin capacity also increase. So their ability to perform actual crime, their ability to become sinful, intentional sinfulness begins to happen. That's where the mind begins to work a certain type of way. That's why we have alcoholism in teenagers. That's why we have unwanted pregnancies among teenagers. That's why we have all of these problems in there, because now they are becoming aware of all of these things. Mind you, I want you to understand something. World consciousness is expanding during this period of time. Okay? World consciousness is expanding during this period of time. So they are becoming more aware of the world. And if it's not done well and properly beforehand, children begin to emulate what the world does. They become what the world does. And then what you have is a poor sense of consequence, but an increased capacity for sin. So consequence on its own is generally not there. They are children. They don't understand the gravity of certain decisions and the consequence of those decisions. However, their capacity for sin increases because they have the energy for it, they have the time for it, they have the room for it, okay? And then what you have is strong sexual awareness and capacity for that. And what you have is immaturity, and you have children. These are children. And I say this up to the age of 21 because here's the important thing. Even at the age of 21, they are children. I mean, we can say it however we want to say it. I've observed the world, and I can say in my observation of the world, 21-year-olds are by and large children. In certain states and countries in the world, a 21-year-old is considered a minor. They're not allowed to drink up until the age of 21. And the reason why that's so is because even at that age, there's an incapacity to make proper decisions. I would then venture even to say between the age of 21 to the age of 25, it is then when we have now what we call the end of your childlike state. The end of a childlike state. So a 22-year-old is technically a child. A 23-year-old is technically a child. A 25-year-old is technically a child. And around the age of 25 is when we can actually begin to say, you are becoming an adult. All right? And I mean, science proves this. Even your brain fully develops around the age of 25. So for most of the time, anyone under the age of 25, by definition, is a child. All right. Now, we say that now in our 30s, and we say that now, but 25-year-olds will be very offended by this. But most people, even at the age of 22, 23, 24, still are making career decisions. They're unsure about where they are. They're still unsure about their place in the world and how the place works. And for the most part, that is still a developing mind and a developing person. So it goes to say, without saying, that between then the ages of 21 to 25 is the complete end of a childlike state, number one. Number two, there's a deeper understanding of life, right? Life is beginning to make sense. Relationships are beginning to make sense. I always joke in my house that I want my kids to date after the age of 21. I want them to be exposed to some of these things at that age. And I know some people have very strong feelings about it. I don't think a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old has any business dating. I'm sorry, that's just me. Even with my son, now I don't want to be selective, gender selective. With my son, I'm happier for him to start talking about dating later in his 20s. I want them to focus. I want them to build. I want them to be focused. And unfortunately, I have no real control over such things because by any standard, any age over the age of 18 or 19 is an adult. But I genuinely regret some of the decisions I made in my life earlier in my early 20s because I thought I had an understanding of what life was, of what marriage was, of what dating was. And most of that was just games and stuff we were playing because we were not yet mature to make such critical decisions. So I really believe that a deeper understanding of life begins then at the age of 21 to 25. You are ready for maturity at the age of 21 to 25. You have more control over your body and you're more control over your understanding of the world. That's that moment in which now adulthood begins. So true adulthood then begins from around the age of 25 and becomes pronounced at the age of 30. enter now this period that we have where the Jews then would then say, you are now an adult. At the age of 30, then your father claims you as a son and then claims you as a son and then gives you heirship. You are now an heir. You are now officially a child in this house. Now, why does this matter? And even going back to the biblical narrative, I'm going to break this down and why this conversation is so important. If you really understand the Jewish setup, you would understand that between the ages of 0 and 12, the first time, that time is an investment into a child's moral campus. Before we go anywhere, we need God in children. We need a sense of godliness, a sense of morality, a sense of understanding of the world at that age in their life. That is the most critical stage in which we instill godly values. Because after the age of 12, they are capable of anything. My mom says something really interesting all the time. She says, we do not give birth to Christians, we give birth to people. And we always assume that because I'm a Christian, my children are also Christians, and that's not true. It's our responsibility then to teach these things to our children. Value, respect, love, compassion, empathy. These things must be taught before a child turns 12. All right, based on the timeline that I've given you here. Now, after the age of 12, between the age of 12 to 30, right, between that age to 30, a child is taught craft. And during that period of that time, the Jews then would spend this period of time teaching a child how to do craft. So he would then walk with his father, and his father would teach him everything he needs to know, women with their mother. And the reason why this is important is because now, this is the development of your place and your vocation and your contribution to the world. As you become aware of the broader world and your capacity and your place in it, you become aware of your responsibilities and your rights in the world. May you learn to have something to apply to the world. Be a meaningful contributor to in terms of value to how the world works. And so that's a very critical part of this thing, and how you can actually be a meaningful contributor in the community of the world. Now, unfortunately, our current education system doesn't quite work that way. At the age of 30, you must then be proven to be worthy. Worthy of what? Worthy of your household name. Now, why is that important? Because then at the same time, as I'm building in part of this, community is the most important thing was the most important thing in the biblical narrative as well as in Jewish cultures. In the African culture, same thing. Community is the most important thing. One of the most problematic and confusing aspects of modern day Christianity is that we've built it absent of community. We've built it absent of value, of contribution to the broader community, and most importantly, we've built it absent of the morality that was supposed to be instilled in us in a younger age. So we're trying to contribute to the world, but we can't, because for the most part, you missed out on the time when you were supposed to have instilled values. And we're trying to teach 15-year-olds how to have values. We're trying to teach them to be respectful, and it doesn't work. We're trying to teach 20-year-olds to be respectful. It doesn't work. We're trying to teach 30-year-olds to be respectful. It doesn't work. By the time you get to the age of 30, then you are proven in the community of the people that you are called to be part of. By the time you turn 30, you have contributed meaningfully to the world through your own hands, through craft, through teachings given from father to son, from mother to daughter, and you have the value to contribute to that. This is important because for a lot of us, we will then realize where we missed the mark, and where we missed the mark in our own lives, in our contribution to our own lives. I stopped at 30. Because 30, you are now an adult. People say life begins at 40, but we know the truth. Life begins at 30. At 30, your body begins to change. I started realizing I can't stay up all night watching soapies and TV and all that stuff. I used to do that in my 20s. And I started realizing in my 30s, oh my word, I made so many bad decisions. I started realizing I'm the adult now in this environment. I have to research and be competent. I have to do all of that. In my 30s, I began to realize that a bad decision I make has a massive, profound effect on my workers. It has an effect on my children. It has an effect on my wife. It has an effect on other people. So in your 30s, you become all of that. Now, all work our way down, and life and meaning and all that stuff. As you get into your 40s now, a certain transition begins to happen because most of us have children that are progressively independent. So you are beginning to have more free time. You're beginning to have more income available. All of that stuff begins to happen as you work your way into your 50s and 60s. And then we get into the legacy age. Now, the legacy age is very different from one person to another because most of the time it's affected by finance and income and all of that stuff. But the legacy age is where most men commit suicide. I'm talking about men specifically. Most women divorce their husbands. Surprisingly, a high number of people that divorce in their 50s. And this begins to happen because now the conversations are legacy conversations. People want more out of life. They realize I've been with a person that I've been living with, but we don't actually love each other. We're just raising the kids together. Some people begin to realize I want more out of my life when I die. What do I want life to become? And this era that we have ongoing is what we call legacy. It is the place where most of us begin to think about what we want out of life. We begin to realize we did not build relationships throughout the course of our lives, but that we are surrounded by co-workers and we are surrounded by just people that are not really friends to us anymore, that we spent most of our time at work and not at home, and we didn't build enough relationships. And these realities begin to open up to us because now you have so much free time and nobody to spend it with. So these are some of the realities and the revelations that come out of life, and we are now reflecting. Legacy time is a time when we reflect on the quality of life and the decisions that we've made. And some of us have a lot to deal with and to prepare for that. I want to challenge you to look at your life in the timeline of this and then determine what role your moral compass is, what role your time is. How are you spending your time with your family, with God? How are you spending time with all of these things? It's very difficult to spend time with God when you didn't instill that value earlier in your life. And even as you interact with your children and through your life, whatever stage of life you are in, this is a very important map to use even in your life to determine where, how, and why you're doing what you're doing at this juncture of your life. God bless you.